Let me start by saying this. I never imagined that something as ordinary as a driveway could turn into the center of my life's biggest headache. But here we are, and trust me, it's a story worth telling. When my wife, Lisa, and I first bought our little craftsman-style house on Maple Lane, it felt like everything was falling into place. We'd saved for years to afford it, and when we finally got the keys, it was one of the happiest moments of our lives. The neighborhood seemed perfect. Quiet streets, lined with trees, kids riding bikes, and neighbors who always waved hello. It wasn't fancy or over the top. It was just simple, cozy, and exactly what we wanted. Our driveway was nothing special either, just a plain slab of concrete leading up to the garage. It wasn't too wide, not too long, just enough space for our 2 cars, and maybe a basketball hoop for our son Tyler. We spent countless afternoons out there shooting hoops, laughing, and teaching him how to dribble without losing control. Sometimes we even set up a lemonade stand at the edge of the driveway during summer weekends. It became more than just a patch of concrete. It was part of our family, part of our routine. But then, everything changed. And it all started because of one person, Karen Whitmore, or, as everyone in the neighborhood would soon call her, HOA Karen. Karen moved in next door about 6 months ago. From the moment she arrived, it was clear she wasn't like the rest of us. She drove a shiny luxury SUV, wore designer clothes, and carried herself like she owned the place, not just her house, but the entire neighborhood. At first, I thought she was just trying to make a good impression. Maybe she was nervous about fitting in or wanted to show off her new life. But it didn't take long to realize that Karen wasn't interested in blending in. No, Karen wanted to rule. Her reign of terror began subtly. At first, it was small things. She sent notes to the neighbors complaining about lawn ornaments. "Garden gnomes are tacky," she wrote in perfect cursive handwriting. Then came the emails reminding everyone to take down their holiday lights by January 2nd. Fair enough, I guess. Rules are rules, right? But Karen didn't stop there. Oh no, she kept going, pushing harder and harder until it felt like she was breathing down our necks every single day. And then, one sunny Saturday morning, she came knocking on my door. I was sipping coffee and scrolling through my phone, enjoying the peace and quiet, when I heard the sound of heels clicking against the pavement outside. I opened the door to find Karen standing there with a clipboard in one hand and a smug smile on her face. "Good morning, Greg," she said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "I need to talk to you about something important regarding your property." My stomach dropped. Whenever someone says important, it usually means trouble. Still, I tried to stay polite. "Sure, Karen. What's up?" She glanced down at her clipboard, flipping through papers like she was some kind of detective uncovering a crime. "It seems," she said slowly, looking up at me with an air of superiority, "that your driveway encroaches onto community property." I stared at her, completely baffled. "What do you mean, community property?" She sighed dramatically, as if explaining something to a child. "According to the HOA guidelines, anything beyond the designated boundary is considered shared space. Your driveway extends past that line." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My driveway. Shared space. This was insane. I stood there, staring at Karen, trying to process what she had just said. My driveway, my plain, boring, unremarkable driveway, was suddenly the subject of some bizarre property dispute. It felt like something out of a sitcom, not real life. "Karen," I started, forcing myself to stay calm. "This driveway has been here since we bought the house 5 years ago. We've never had any issues with it before. Are you sure about this?" She gave me a tight-lipped smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, I'm absolutely sure. I've reviewed the HOA guidelines thoroughly, and they're very clear on this matter. The boundary markers are outdated, Greg. You'll need to remove any personal items obstructing the area immediately." Personal items. Obstructing. I looked at her incredulously. "You mean my car?" Her smile widened, but there was no warmth in it. Exactly. Until this is resolved, you'll have to park elsewhere. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wanted me to stop using my own driveway because she claimed half of it belonged to who exactly? The neighborhood. The HOA. It didn't make sense. But Karen wasn't done yet. I've already contacted the HOA board, she added, tapping her clipboard for emphasis. They're aware of the situation, and I expect them to take swift action. In the meantime, please refrain from using the disputed portion of your driveway. With that, she turned on her heel and marched back to her house, leaving me standing there with my mouth hanging open. Lisa came out a few minutes later, holding Tyler's hand. She took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked, concern creasing her forehead. I shook my head, still trying to wrap my mind around the absurdity of it all. Karen says part of our driveway isn't ours anymore. She's calling it community property. Lisa's jaw dropped. What? That's ridiculous. This driveway has always been ours, hasn't it? I nodded. Of course it has. But apparently, Karen thinks otherwise. And get this, she expects us to stop parking on it until the HOA sorts it out. Lisa crossed her arms, her expression hardening. That's insane. What gives her the right to decide something like that? I shrugged, feeling helpless. I don't know. But knowing Karen, she won't let this go anytime soon. Sure enough, things escalated quickly. By Monday morning, Karen had posted official-looking signs along the edge of my driveway, declaring it community property. She even went so far as to park her SUV smack dab in the middle of it, blocking access to our garage. It was bad enough seeing her car there every time I pulled into the street, but what really got under my skin was how smug she looked whenever I confronted her. "This is my driveway, Karen," I told her firmly one afternoon after work. "You can't just claim it as your own." She crossed her arms and tilted her head, giving me that same condescending look she'd worn during our first conversation. "Greg, I understand that this might be difficult for you to accept, but rules are rules. If you refuse to comply, I'll have no choice but to escalate the matter further." Escalate? What did that even mean? Was she planning to call the police? File a lawsuit? The whole thing seemed so petty and unnecessary. Yet Karen acted like she was waging some kind of epic battle for justice, as if my driveway was the linchpin holding the entire neighborhood together. Word spread fast among the neighbors. Some people avoided eye contact when they saw me, clearly uncomfortable with the drama unfolding next door. Others weren't shy about sharing their opinions. One elderly woman stopped by while walking her dog and muttered something about how these kinds of disputes ruin communities. A younger couple from down the block actually sided with Karen, nodding sympathetically when she explained her side of the story. Meanwhile, Lisa grew more frustrated by the day. "This is ridiculous," she fumed one evening over dinner. "How can she think she has the right to do this? It's not even her property." I sighed, pushing my food around on my plate. "I don't know, Lisa, but I'm not giving up without a fight." Tyler, who had been quietly listening to our conversation, looked up at me with wide eyes. "Dad, does this mean we can't play basketball anymore?" His question hit me harder than I expected. Seeing the worry on his face made me realize how much bigger this issue was than just a driveway. It was about protecting our home, our family, and our peace of mind. And if Karen thought she could intimidate us into backing down, she was dead wrong. The situation with Karen and the driveway quickly spiraled out of control. By Wednesday, it wasn't just about her parking her SUV on my driveway anymore. It was like she had declared war on me personally. Every time I stepped outside, I felt like I was walking into a battlefield. The tension in the neighborhood grew thicker with each passing day, and it seemed like everyone had an opinion about what was happening. Karen didn't stop at posting signs or parking her car where it didn't belong. Oh no, she went full steam ahead, rallying other neighbors to her cause. Flyers started appearing in mailboxes across Maple Lane, warning residents about the dangers of encroaching driveways and urging them to report any similar violations they might notice. Encroaching driveways. It sounded like something out of a bad legal drama, not real life. Lisa and I tried reasoning with her multiple times, hoping to find some common ground. One evening after dinner, we walked over to her house and knocked on the door. She answered wearing her usual polished outfit, heels, tailored pants, and a silk blouse, and invited us inside with that fake smile plastered across her face. "Karen," Lisa began gently, "we've lived here for 5 years without anyone mentioning this so-called boundary issue. Can you explain why this suddenly became a problem now?" Karen leaned back on her couch, tapping her perfectly manicured nails against the armrest. "Well, Lisa, these things don't always come to light immediately. But now that I've reviewed the HOA guidelines thoroughly, it's clear your driveway is violating community standards. As a responsible member of this neighborhood, I have a duty to address it." "A duty?" I interjected, struggling to keep my voice steady. "This isn't about responsibility. It's about you deciding my property doesn't belong to me anymore. Where's the proof that this part of the driveway is actually community property?" She smirked, pulling out a folder from her coffee table. "I've done my research, Greg. These documents clearly show outdated survey markers. Until a new survey confirms otherwise, the rules stand." Lisa shook her head, exasperated. "But even if there's a discrepancy, and we're not saying there is, you can't just take over someone else's driveway because of a technicality. That's not how this works." Karen's smile tightened, and I could tell she was losing patience with us. "If you'd simply cooperate, none of this would be necessary. Unfortunately, your refusal leaves me no choice but to escalate matters further." Escalate matters? What did that even mean? Was she planning to march into City Hall herself, or maybe chain herself to my garage door? At this point, nothing would have surprised me. Things got worse when a letter arrived from the HOA board. Apparently, Karen had filed a formal complaint against us, demanding immediate action. According to the letter, until the dispute was resolved, I was required to vacate the disputed portion of my driveway, or face daily fines starting at $100. The audacity of it all left me speechless. $100 a day for using my own driveway. Lisa read the letter over my shoulder, her hands trembling slightly. "This is insane," she muttered. "How can they side with her without even hearing our side of the story?" I crumpled the letter in frustration and threw it onto the counter. They didn't hear our side because Karen probably convinced them before we even had a chance to speak up. Tyler wandered into the kitchen just then, his basketball under one arm. "Dad, what's going on? Why are people talking about our driveway?" I forced a smile, kneeling down to his level. "It's nothing to worry about, buddy. Just a little disagreement with a neighbor. Everything will be okay." But deep down, I wasn't so sure. This wasn't just about a driveway anymore. It felt like Karen was trying to assert dominance over the entire neighborhood, using me as an example. If she could bully us into submission, who would be next? That weekend, tensions boiled over during a block party hosted by another neighbor. Normally, these events were lighthearted affairs filled with laughter, food, and casual conversation. But this time, whispers followed me wherever I went. Some people avoided eye contact altogether, while others openly sided with Karen, nodding along as she explained her version of events to anyone within earshot. One man approached me near the grill, holding a plate of burgers. "Look, Greg," he said quietly, "I get that this must be frustrating for you. But honestly, it's probably easier to just give in. Fighting the HOA is like punching a brick wall. It'll only hurt you in the end." His words stung, not because they were wrong, but because they highlighted how powerless I felt. Was I really supposed to roll over and let Karen win? Let her turn my home into some kind of battleground? No, I couldn't do that. Not yet. As the sun set and the party wound down, I stood in my backyard staring at the driveway, the source of all this chaos. My driveway, my home. And I realized that backing down wasn't an option. If Karen wanted a fight, she was going to get one. The showdown I had been dreading finally happened late one Friday evening. It was the kind of day that started off normal enough. Work, errands, dinner with the family, but ended in utter chaos. And it all began with Karen's car parked squarely in the middle of my driveway. I pulled into the street after a long day at the office, tired and ready to relax. But as I approached my house, I saw her standing there, arms crossed, blocking my way like some sort of suburban bouncer. Her SUV loomed behind her, gleaming under the fading sunlight. Tyler was in the back seat, asking why we weren't pulling into the driveway like usual. I didn't have an answer for him. Not one he'd understand anyway. "Karen," I said, stepping out of the car. "What is this about now?" She gave me a smug look, her lips curling into that insufferable smile. "You know exactly what this is about, Greg. This is community property, and you're not allowed to park here." My patience snapped. All the frustration, stress, and anger from the past week boiled over in an instant. "This is my driveway, Karen. You don't get to decide where I can or can't park my car. Now move your vehicle before I call the police." Her eyes widened slightly, but she quickly recovered. "Call them," she said, pulling out her phone. "Let's see what they say." For a moment, I froze. Was she serious? Did she really think calling 911 would solve anything? But then I remembered Tyler sitting in the back seat, watching everything unfold. I couldn't lose my cool, not in front of him. So instead of yelling, I turned off the engine, stepped out of the car, and faced her head-on. "Fine," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Go ahead and call them. Let's see how far this goes." She dialed 911 without hesitation, speaking loudly into the phone as if she were starring in her own reality show. "Yes, hello, officer," she began dramatically. "There's a man refusing to comply with HOA regulations regarding shared property. He's threatening to drive through despite clear signs indicating the area is restricted." I rolled my eyes but kept quiet, letting her spin her version of events. When she handed the phone to me, the operator sounded more confused than concerned. "Sir, can you explain what's going on?" I took a deep breath and laid out the facts as calmly as I could. "Officer, this is my driveway. The woman next door claims part of it belongs to the community, but there's no proof of that. She's parked her car here illegally and is now blocking me from accessing my own property." Within minutes, 2 patrol cars pulled up to the curb. Neighbors peeked out their windows, drawn by the flashing lights and commotion. Lisa came outside too, holding Tyler close, looking both worried and furious at the same time. One of the officers climbed out of his car and walked over to us, his expression somewhere between amusement and disbelief. "This is about a driveway?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Karen launched into another dramatic monologue, waving her arms and gesturing wildly toward the driveway. "It's clearly outlined in the HOA guidelines. This man refuses to respect community boundaries." I let her finish, resisting the urge to interrupt. When she finally stopped talking, I handed the officer a copy of our property survey, a document Lisa and I had dug up earlier that week. "Here's the original survey showing the exact boundary lines," I explained. "As you can see, the driveway falls entirely within our property." The officer glanced at the papers, then looked at Karen. "Ma'am, do you have any documentation proving otherwise?" She faltered for the first time, clutching her clipboard tightly. "Well, not yet, but I've already requested a new survey." "That doesn't change the current situation," the officer interrupted gently. "Until there's official proof of a boundary issue, this appears to be private property." Karen's face turned bright red, and for once she was speechless. The officers exchanged glances, clearly trying not to laugh. One of them turned to me and said, "We'll leave it at that for now. If this escalates further, consider contacting a lawyer or filing a formal complaint." With that, they got back into their cars and drove away, leaving Karen standing alone in the driveway. For a moment, The only sound was the hum of crickets in the background. Then, without saying another word, she stormed off, slamming her car door shut behind her. Lisa let out a shaky laugh, shaking her head. Well, that was something. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and exhaustion. We hadn't won yet, but at least the cops hadn't sided with Karen. Still, I knew this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The fallout from the 911 incident only made Karen dig her heels in deeper. She wasn't about to back down, not after being publicly humiliated by the police officers who clearly didn't take her side. Instead of admitting defeat, she doubled down on her crusade, determined to prove that she was right, and I was wrong. And unfortunately for me, she had a knack for stirring up drama. Over the next few days, Karen went into full overdrive. Flyers began appearing all over the neighborhood, on windshields, mailboxes, even taped to front doors. Each one carried bold headlines like "Protect Our Community Property" and "Stand Against Encroachment." Beneath the dramatic language were vague warnings about how unchecked property disputes could lead to chaos. It was ridiculous, but effective. Some neighbors started whispering behind my back, wondering if maybe Karen had a point. Others avoided me altogether, unwilling to get caught in the crossfire. One morning, I found Lisa sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of these flyers spread out in front of her. Her face was pale, her hands gripping her coffee mug tightly. "Greg," she said quietly, "this has gone too far. Look at this nonsense she's spreading. People are starting to believe her." I sat down across from her, scanning the flyers. They were filled with half-truths and exaggerated claims, painting me as some kind of reckless rule breaker who didn't care about the community. "She's making it sound like I'm trying to tear apart the neighborhood," I muttered, shaking my head. "It's absurd." Lisa sighed, looking up at me with tired eyes. "What are we going to do? We can't just let her keep doing this. She's poisoning everyone against us." She was right. This wasn't just about the driveway anymore. It was about our reputation, our place in the neighborhood. If Karen kept pushing, she might succeed in turning everyone against us. That thought scared me more than anything else. Determined to fight back, I decided it was time to bring in reinforcements. I hired a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah, who specialized in property disputes. During our first meeting, she listened carefully as I explained everything that had happened, from Karen's initial accusations to the 911 call. When I finished, she nodded thoughtfully. "This isn't uncommon," she said. "People like your neighbor often misinterpret HOA rules or use them as leverage to push their own agenda. But don't worry, we'll sort this out." With Sarah's help, I gathered every piece of evidence I could find. Old property surveys, satellite images showing the driveway's location, even statements from longtime neighbors confirming that nothing had changed since we moved in. One elderly couple who'd lived on Maple Lane for decades wrote a letter saying they remembered when the driveway was installed and that it had always been within our property lines. Armed with this information, Sarah filed a formal request for a new survey, which would settle the matter once and for all. In the meantime, she advised me to stay calm and avoid engaging with Karen directly. "Don't give her any ammunition," she warned. "Let the facts speak for themselves." But staying calm was easier said than done. Every day felt like walking through a minefield. Neighbors who had once been friendly now seemed distant, unsure of whose side to take. A few openly supported Karen, nodding along as she ranted about community integrity during HOA meetings. Others tried to mediate, suggesting compromise solutions that only left me feeling more frustrated. Then there was Tyler. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but he could sense the tension. One evening, while we were eating dinner, he asked, "Dad, why does Mrs. Whitmore hate us?" His question hit me hard. I put down my fork and looked at him, searching for the right words. "She doesn't hate us, buddy. She just disagrees with us about something. But don't worry, it's going to be okay." Lisa gave me a sad smile, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "We'll get through this," she said softly. "Together." As the hearing date approached, the stress became almost unbearable. Would the judge see through Karen's theatrics, or would she somehow manage to convince the court that my driveway was public land? The uncertainty gnawed at me, keeping me awake at night. But deep down, I knew one thing for sure: giving up wasn't an option. Not when it came to protecting my home and my family. The day of the hearing finally arrived, and I woke up with a knot in my stomach. The courtroom was small but intimidating, with wooden benches that creaked under the weight of the crowd. Half the neighborhood had shown up, eager to see how this bizarre driveway drama would play out. Some people came to support me, while others sat firmly in Karen's corner, whispering among themselves as they waited for the proceedings to begin. Karen strutted into the room wearing her finest blazer, her clipboard clutched tightly in one hand. She looked confident, like she already knew she'd won. I, on the other hand, felt anything but. My palms were sweaty, and my tie suddenly felt too tight. Lisa squeezed my hand reassuringly from the seat beside me, but even her presence couldn't calm my nerves completely. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. She was an older woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. After briefly reviewing the case, she turned to Karen. "Mrs. Whitmore, you may proceed." Karen stood up, smoothing her blazer before launching into what sounded like a rehearsed speech. She talked about community integrity, shared resources, and how my supposed encroachment was setting a dangerous precedent for the neighborhood. Her voice carried a tone of authority, and she waved her binder around dramatically, as if it contained irrefutable evidence. But when the judge asked her to present actual documentation proving her claims, Karen hesitated. "I've requested a new survey," she said, her confidence wavering slightly. "Until then, the HOA guidelines clearly state." "The HOA guidelines aren't law," the judge interrupted gently but firmly. "And without proof of a boundary issue, your argument lacks substance." Next, it was my turn. With Sarah's guidance, I presented our evidence: the original property survey, satellite images showing the driveway's location, and statements from longtime neighbors confirming its placement. I spoke slowly and clearly, trying to keep my emotions in check. This wasn't just about winning. It was about showing respect for the process and letting the facts speak for themselves. As I laid out each piece of evidence, I noticed something shift in the room. The murmurs grew quieter, and some of the skeptical faces softened. Even the judge seemed impressed by the thoroughness of our preparation. When I finished, Sarah added a few closing remarks, emphasizing that the burden of proof lay with Karen, not us. Finally, the judge leaned forward, her expression thoughtful. "Based on the evidence provided," she began, pausing for effect, "the plaintiff's claims are unfounded. The defendant's driveway remains private property, and no further action will be taken against him." The room erupted in murmurs. Karen's face turned bright red, and for once she didn't have a snappy comeback. She gathered her things quickly and hurried out of the courtroom, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. Afterward, Lisa hugged me tightly, tears welling up in her eyes. "We did it," she whispered. "You stood your ground, and we won." But the real surprise came later that evening. As I pulled into the driveway, finally free of Karen's SUV, I noticed something unusual. A group of neighbors was standing near the edge of my property, holding tools and bags of mulch. At first, I thought they were there to confront me again. But then Joe, a guy who lived 2 doors down, stepped forward with a sheepish grin. "Hey, Greg," he said, scratching the back of his neck. "Look, we know Karen got carried away with all this stuff. We just wanted to say sorry for not speaking up sooner. And we figured we'd help spruce up your yard a bit. You know, as a thank you for sticking up for yourself and for all of us." I stared at them, stunned. Slowly, a smile spread across my face. "That's really kind of you guys. Thank you." For the next hour, we worked together, planting flowers and trimming bushes. It wasn't much, but it felt like a fresh start. For the first time in weeks, the tension in the air lifted, replaced by laughter and easy conversation. Even Tyler joined in, tossing handfuls of mulch onto the flower beds with glee. As the sun set, casting a golden glow over Maple Lane, I realized something important. This whole ordeal had been exhausting and infuriating, but it also brought unexpected blessings. Neighbors who had once kept their distance now felt like allies. And though Karen's antics had caused chaos, they'd also reminded me of the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. In the weeks following the hearing, life on Maple Lane began to settle back into its usual rhythm, but with a few notable changes. Karen Whitmore, once the self-appointed queen of the neighborhood, became something of a ghost. Her shiny SUV rarely left the garage, and when it did, she avoided eye contact with everyone, including me. The fence she'd hastily installed along her property line was crooked in places, as if she'd been in such a rush to redraw her boundaries that she hadn't bothered to measure properly. It was almost comical, really. Rumors swirled about her behind closed doors. Some said she was embarrassed by the judge's ruling and had decided to lay low for a while. Others claimed she was plotting her next move, though no one could imagine what that might be after such a public defeat. Personally, I didn't care what she was doing anymore. As far as I was concerned, the driveway drama was over, and I intended to keep it that way. What surprised me most, though, was how the rest of the neighborhood responded to everything that had happened. For months, Karen's constant complaints and nitpicking had created an atmosphere of tension and division. People were afraid to speak up or challenge her, worried they'd become her next target. But after the hearing, something shifted. Neighbors who had stayed silent during the worst of it started reaching out, not just to me, but to each other. One evening, as Lisa and I sat on our front porch watching the sunset, Joe from down the street walked over carrying a six-pack of soda. He grinned sheepishly and held it out like a peace offering. "Hey, Greg, Lisa, mind if I join you for a bit?" We exchanged a glance, then nodded, inviting him to sit. At first, the conversation was light. Talk of the weather, Tyler's upcoming soccer games, and the new flower beds we planted together. But eventually, Joe leaned forward, his expression serious. "Listen, I owe you an apology," he said. "When all this stuff with Karen first started, I should have spoken up sooner. Instead, I let her steamroll everyone because I didn't want to make waves." I shook my head, surprised by his candor. "You don't have to apologize, Joe. Trust me. I get it. Karen's intimidating." He chuckled ruefully. "Yeah, well, turns out she's not as untouchable as she thinks. Seeing you stand up to her made a lot of us realize we didn't have to put up with her nonsense either." That night, Joe wasn't the only neighbor who stopped by. A few others joined us too, sharing stories of their own run-ins with Karen and vowing to support each other moving forward. By the time we went inside, I felt lighter than I had in months. It was as if the weight of Karen's bullying had lifted, not just for me, but for everyone. Tyler noticed the change too. One afternoon, as he dribbled his basketball on the driveway, he looked up at me with a grin. "Dad, Mrs. Whitmore doesn't yell at us anymore," he exclaimed, as if it were the greatest news in the world. "That's right, buddy," I replied, ruffling his hair. "And she never will again." Lisa and I talked often about whether we still wanted to stay on Maple Lane. After everything that had happened, it would have been easy to pack up and leave, to find a quieter place where drama like this wouldn't follow us. But the truth was, we loved our home. And now, more than ever, we felt connected to the community around us. The ordeal with Karen had tested us, yes, but it had also brought us closer to the people who mattered. As summer turned to fall, Maple Lane transformed into a sea of orange leaves and crisp air. Halloween decorations popped up in yards, and the annual block party returned after a year-long hiatus. This time, instead of whispers and side glances, there was laughter and camaraderie. Someone even joked about turning Karen's crooked fence into a haunted house prop, which earned a round of applause. Looking back, I realized that the driveway dispute had taught me something valuable. Conflict can bring out the worst in people, but it can also bring out the best. Standing up to Karen wasn't just about protecting my property. It was about standing up for fairness, respect, and the kind of neighborhood we all wanted to live in. And though the scars of the past few months would always linger, they reminded me of how far we'd come and how much stronger we were together. Now, when I pull into my driveway, I don't see concrete or lines on a map. I see resilience. I see family. And most importantly, I see proof that sometimes fighting for what's yours is worth every ounce of effort.